All right, good afternoon, good evening. I'd like to call the special board meeting workshop on facilities, November 14th, 2019 to order. My assumption is I'm turning this over to superintendent and going towards Mr. Zierle, I would guess.
Thank you, President Walker. I want to welcome everyone here tonight, and thank you all for coming. I know your time is very valuable, but tonight we have some exciting information to be able to share with you. As you know that the past November, actually a year ago November, the voters passed 2 bonds for our elementary school district, which then kind of got the engines rolling. After that, looked at schools to identify particular schools for facility plans, and we have completed the first third of the schools that we will be going through. Tonight, we're going to take a look at some of the plans and recommendations, not only from the district, but also from the community at each of those schools. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Zierle.
Thank you, Dr. Noguchi. Is that too loud or are we good? Let's put it down a little bit. Okay, as previously mentioned, we thank you for being here. We recognize it is another meeting, another night of your time, but this is very important to the work ahead of us for Modesto City Schools, and not only the 8 school sites that we're going to highlight tonight, but all of our schools potentially are going to see some improvement for this bond measure. So with that, I just want to welcome some people here that don't normally attend our meetings, but are representing certain groups. We have our Citizens Bond Oversight Committee here, represented by Esther Campbell. The Citizens Bond Oversight Committee meets quarterly to review our bond program, our expenditures, and do they align with what we said, we promised the voters we were going to do. So they're very interested in what we have moving forward. And we also have 2 of our site principals here that were very involved in this process to develop the plans for their sites. We have Gareth Soares from John Muir Elementary and Sue McCann from Shackelford Elementary. So thank you for taking your time to come and see this. I believe for our principals, this is the first chance they have to see the final results. And then just walked in another representative from the CBOC, Cecil Russell, is here as well. So thank you to all for coming, and to the regulars that come to our board meetings and special board meetings. It's a very exciting time for Modesto City Schools and what we have to talk about tonight. The intent of this meeting is to provide the board and the community with an opportunity to review the first 8 site master plans. These were the first priority that we call phase 1. These were identified through a process as the highest priority school sites for bond projects, and then allow for the board to provide input into the recommendations, or what we're going to call the implementation plan. A master plan is not an implementation plan. We recognize that we do not have all the available funds with Measures D&E to complete all of the proposed recommendations, but that's why we're going to talk about phases, and we're going to talk about projects that align with what we call our guiding principles, and also what we promised the voters when we passed both Measures D and E. Tonight we also have some of our partners, our professional partners here, that are very helpful in this presentation, and we'll also be talking to you. Capital Public Finance Group, as you've seen before, is our financial advisors. They couldn't make it tonight, but Lionakis is our design team, our architectural team that put together the master plans, that put together the boards that you see in front of you. Laura Noss is here representing Lionakis, and she'll be talking to you when we get to the part of the presentation about the master plans. And we also have Sony Peerwall with School Facility Consultants. They will be guiding us, and we'll talk about state funding and accessing state funding in the future to augment our bond program, really extend our bond program, and how we go about accessing, applying for and accessing those funds. What you're going to see tonight is just a small piece of what goes into the master plan. We're working on putting together a binder for each one of you. You'll have a very thick binder with each school that is more than just this. There's a lot of backup documentation that goes along with it. If you saw it in the superintendent's office, it's pretty thick just for the 8 school sites. So we're working on giving you a binder that'll have tabs for each school, so you'll see everything that was created, not just a summary that you're going to see tonight in this presentation. As we go through, you're going to see, and we'll talk about conceptual project estimates. That includes a program-wide contingency for unforeseen circumstances, but I just want to point out this is very conceptual at this point. This is a conceptual design phase, so the project estimates are based on that. Some of the percentages, it didn't transfer well into our format for our presentation, so the percentages may look a little off, but the totals you see, the estimate totals for the project are on, and that's what we're going to be working with as we go forward for phase 1. So tonight's agenda, we're gonna give you a brief background on Measures D and E. We're gonna update the board on bond projects to date. I know many of you took the field trip before school started, but we're gonna update you with some financial information on the bond projects. Then we're gonna talk about the development of the site master plans, an overview of the site master plans, which we're calling phase 1, and then we're going to get into project funding, in particular state funding, that we hope to have access to in the future. So just a quick background for Measures D and E. It's a $131 million authorization under both Measures D and E, $74 million for Measure D, which we classified as health and safety, and then $57 million for Measure E, which we categorize as classroom science lab enhancement. We will talk about leveraging these 2 bond measures with state funding because most of our sites, if not all of our sites, are eligible for modernization funding, and we'll let our facility consultant talk about that later on. As you know, there were some quick strike projects that we did this summer with our first issuance. The goal here was to reach all sites in 2 years. Projects in the first issuance were this summer, 2019, that we completed, and we'll share that with you. But we'll also have in the first issuance projects for this coming summer of 2020 that we're planning. So when we look at our issuance schedule, it's in series. And so with that series is going to cover 2 or 3 years worth of construction projects. The phase 1, now the master plans are included in the first series, but phase 1 work that we talk about are not in the first series. That will come with the next issuance in the next series of bonds. Creations of school site master plans, that was in the first issuance for short-term quick strike projects, and then design projects for projects planned in summer of 2021. So the projects we're talking about right now, as soon as we get to where we can get into the design phase, we have the dollars already in our first issuance to work on the design for the first phase of these projects. You've seen this before, but just a quick review for the goals of the school site master plans. Laura will go into this more thoroughly in that part of the presentation. But it's a tool for us and you to evaluate different layout options for the site. So you can see up here what a visual layout option will look like for the site once completed. The design professional generates ideas on how to redesign the site or the school, reorient buildings, and also site improvements. Evaluating the cost benefit of changes, and develop site layouts that will assist with identification of future classroom placement. So you can see here when we get to this, all of that is taken into consideration with the final site plan for each of these sites. The schools that we assessed in phase 1, they were the priority assigned by the board, and also staff concurred with these 8. It was Vista, Fairview, Franklin, Fremont, Amur, Wright, Shackelford, and Tuolumne. So these are the 8 boards that you see up here in front of you. Just a quick update on the bond projects completed to date. You'll see here the work that we did this past summer. I won't go through each one of them, but you saw them. Kind of highlight 3, really the 3 junior high gymnasium HVAC additions, and then the Robertson Road parking lot, parent drop-off pickup area were the big ones that we highlight this summer. The 6 exterior paint projects, those got a lot of attention, publicity, because students, staff, community came back to the school with a fresh new paint, fresh new appearance, and it was well received as well. But these were the major projects that we completed this summer with the help of Measures D&E. I'm going to turn it over to Laura now, and yeah, if you want, or
Thank you. Thank you all for having us. We've been on a great journey from helping pick paint colors on some of your campuses to getting to know these 8 sites much better along the way. We want to talk a little bit about our process that we went through in the development of the master plan, because it was a very inclusive process, but we also moved very quickly. We wanted to get to you with some of these priorities. What you see, the Venn diagram up here is kind of the simple diagram I like to use to talk about master planning. That's simple. What do we have? What is it we want and need? And what does it look like to get there? And in each of those phases, we do things like a condition assessment, a facilities inventory, identifying future needs for growth or decline at a school. In the stakeholder input phase, that what do we want and need, we start to judge parity and equity among the schools. We identify guiding principles. And then in the master plan phase, in addition to this big vision, we also put together in that fat book that they were referencing, includes implementation phases that show how we can take small bites out of the apple on our way to a final master plan. What that helps with is, one, identifying things like interim housing, underground infrastructure, how difficult it is to work on an existing occupied campus, but also begins to set budget models up against that. And each and every move we make is really focused on implementation. We want a plan that is implementable over time, and at the end of each phase, the campus is operational and of high quality. Let's see. There we go. What we did, we had each site developed a core group committee that included stakeholders, parent stakeholders, educators, certificated staff at their sites, and we had 3 different meetings. The first was mostly a listening session. The middle one was some progress and things for them to react to, and the final one was our recommended master plan. We also sent with one of our committee members boards similar to what you see here for each of the proposed master plans to open house night, and they collected feedback, just initial reactions from the community as to what their priorities were for the campus and what, from their perspective, was the highest priority at the site. Additionally, we had site tours where we documented the site, including meeting site administrators. We also met with the district's M&O folks, IT folks, and they gave us not only a broad overview, but some of the detailed infrastructure things that we should be watching for on each of the sites. And then we did a high-level review of existing plans for things like structural inadequacy and things like that. Another piece with your guidance, the master plans and of course the bond money had some high-level guiding principles around them. High among those was campus safety and security, and you'll see some of the projects address that, especially through reconfiguration of parking and drop-off. There was a lot of discussion about replacing of multi-purpose and food service facilities because many of your sites have a very long lunch period, multiple lunch periods that last up to 2 hours or more, and just being able to put all of their students in one place to be able to hold events as well. And then finally, to replace aging portables. Again, recognizing not all of them are aging, and so our phasing diagrams began to acknowledge which ones were newer and which were kind of the worst among the portable classroom buildings. So I think that Tim mentioned the needs at each site exceed budget. I have been doing this for 32 years in California schools, and I've never not said that, right? And so the needs are always, on an existing aging infrastructure, will always exceed the budget, and no one ever has as much money as they want to spend on their campuses. So what we had to do was go through a prioritization process. Through the phasing plans, we put together initial phasing plans that were higher than the district wanted to see for phase one, and we were tasked with coming back with a roughly $10 million phase one for each of the 8 sites for your consideration. So those phases, none of those phases detract from what the future goals for each of the site would be. So we did make sure to feature some of those highest priority projects in those first phases. Stakeholder input, I mentioned that at the back to school night, we received feedback on sticky notes on everything, and you can see some of the things are really parallel to the district's goals: security, parking, drop off. We made sure to be at most of the sites at one of the drop off or pickup times of the day and got to experience all the glory that is morning drop off and afternoon pickup throughout the district, and really talked through where people are coming from, how we can improve that to really address student safety and security. There was a lot of discussion on the multi-purpose rooms and things like that from the community, but also that first impression, or when we come into the administration, is that easy to find, or am I wandering through campus? Again, both a safety and security issue and a first impression issue. So to walk you through the site master plans, we did not put all of the phasing plans in this. They are in the bigger document, but what we have shown here is the existing condition, followed by the proposed master plan, and then finally the recommended first phase with the costs associated with that first phase. Some fast facts at each schools. We did analyze the number of portable classrooms, the site capacity compared to its enrollment, school site size, and other things like that help you when you start to compare the schools across the district. Which ones are growing? Are they growing the largest on the smallest campuses? Those kinds of questions. So at Vista, the diagrams you see here is the existing site inventory. At each site, we identified the use of each classroom, all of the core facilities, as well as the other amenities on each campus. We did a classroom count and the type of uses for those spaces. In some cases, some of those classrooms are not used for quote unquote loaded classrooms, daily use classrooms, but they are being used for a lot of support and added program elements at each of the campuses. So Vista, when we look at Vista, one of the high priorities there was to reorient the front door away from the busy entry piece, and we've basically flipped the classrooms, flipped the front door. On the right side of the campus, you'll see a new multi-purpose building, administration and library space. There's a new classroom building to replace portables, and a safe and secure kindergarten at the north of the campus. You can also see that we developed significant parking areas and improved hardscape in this particular plan. The recommended first Well, the total, when we apply escalation factors to each of the phases, is approximately $50 million. And I know what you're all thinking. Can't you build a new school for $50 million? And the answer would be you probably could. But the question is having $50 million at any one time. So taking these small bites out of the plan is the approach that we took in developing the master plans here. The recommended first phase, which we have at about $10 million, introduces the new multipurpose in its ultimate location, some renovation of the administration to create that single point of entry that's so important to safety and security on campus, and some minor replacement or relocation of portable classrooms. Again, we didn't want to do anything in the early phases that would be in conflict with the long-range goals for the campus. At Fairview, those of you who are all familiar with Fairview, is predominantly portable classrooms with 74% of their classrooms in portables. So this particular campus, we took that inventory, and as you can see, there was an original concept to create all the portable classrooms around a central quad. Over time, portables kept getting added along the property line, and the campus has really become spread out. However, at Fairview, the number one goal and really safety and security issue that they felt was the improvement of the parking and drop-off space. You can see in the new plan, we have a significant drop-off area at the southwest corner, additional staff parking. We've created a new kindergarten complex, multi-purpose, and all of those splayed wings are new classroom buildings to replace the portables. One of our chores on all of these campuses was to develop the phasing diagram so that we weren't displacing all of the existing facilities. So when you do review the phasing diagrams, you'll see that we work throughout it to maintain classroom count on each of the campuses so that they can remain operational during construction, which was a key goal. Again, nearly $60 million for this. We're starting with a much more difficult base because of all of the portable buildings on that campus, but we were able to put together a $10 million phase one that gets the multipurpose, that much needed parking and drop-off improvement, and the only displacement we had to do was to relocate 3 of the portable classrooms that you see there in orange. Franklin, about half of their classrooms are in portable buildings at Franklin, and with one of your largest populations at the elementary level, it's a significant project as we took a look at that. You can see at the north end, the portable classrooms. We do have 3 permanent classroom wings, as well as small administration and a very funny shaped little permanent building up at the north end of campus. The master plan reorients things to the north to a new parking and drop-off area with the administration and multi-purpose building flanking an entry and adjacent to a new kindergarten complex. We did maintain the 3 permanent classroom wings and developed an additional classroom wing at the south. You can see a staff parking lot also comes in from the south, separating parent and public drop-off and parking from a large majority of the staff parking at that end. Again, a multiple phase. Typically, these were all 4-phase implementation projects, assuming that they would happen over, 4 or 5 years in between each one. But our $10 million phase one, again, identified a new multi-purpose building and relocated a number of portable classrooms in order to ensure that the new parking and drop-off spaces and the multi-purpose building ended up in their ultimate configuration. At Fremont, about 26% of its classrooms are in portables. It's one of the larger sites, but very limited in parking. We have a core campus and then a number of portables on the west property line that are really kind of problematic. They're up against the street. They're far from campus. They just don't feel as much a part of the campus. And it was a goal of this to reorient the front of campus to the west edge. You can see here a significant parking and drop-off that then begins to orient to a multi-purpose and administrative complex near the south end of campus, and then a new classroom building on the east side of the campus. It was a goal of phase one to ensure that those portables came off the west property line. One of our options, and the option we have here for $10 million, is to relocate those and push them back off the property line and build the new multi-purpose building to begin our movement towards the ultimate master plan of reorienting that front door. John Muir Elementary, again, about 50% of the classrooms are in portable buildings. And we began by looking at this one from a parking and drop-off standpoint as well. Lots of parking along the south edge and really kind of unorganized drop-off areas there. So we've reoriented this to the east with isolating bus drop-off only and kindergarten drop-off on the south. And you can see an all-new parking lot and a drop-off loop created on the east side of campus. Again, a reorientation of administration and the multi-purpose off that new side of campus, and new classroom buildings to replace aging portables on that site. We were able, because of the reorientation, to bring this one in about $10 million for phase one also, despite its large price tag, because the multi-purpose wasn't on top of other things. So a new parking lot and multi-purpose is our recommended phase one, and that leaves all of the other classrooms intact. Orville Wright Elementary School, about half of the classrooms are in portable buildings. We looked at this classroom. Again, this is one of your prototype buildings. It's very similar, this linear kind of H-shaped classroom building, permanent building. And so when you start to outgrow it, the natural tendency is to line the portables up along one of the property lines, as was done, or in this case, both property lines. What we looked at here was, again, trying to get a lot of the public-facing things at the north edge of campus, and getting parking and drop-off in a safe area off of the public street. They do have some vandalism problems in this area with the vehicles, and getting them back off the street for staff parking was a priority. There are a lot of walkers at this campus, so it wasn't quite the same drop-off issue that we had, but getting this parking off the street was a high priority. We did propose the multi-purpose building in what is now the staff parking lot at the front end of campus, and then reconfiguring the existing multi-purpose into administration and library space, and that would then be a flanking new front entry and an entry plaza to the campus, and then along that west property line, developing a new parking lot area while we build a new classroom building to replace all of the portables that flank the two property lines on this campus. We have a couple of options here, and both of them get the parking lot and multi-purpose building in phase one, this one for about $8 million, relocating the property line, the portables from the west property line to the east. The other option is slightly more at $12 million. What it does, I'm sorry, it's not highlighted here, is it also includes the the existing multi-purpose room reconfiguration into that new administration space. So it does complete that front entry sequence of the multi-purpose and administration. Shackelford, 37% of the classrooms in portable buildings on a relatively small site. We look at Shackelford, and again, you see that linear classroom model, existing classroom model, and the master plan again begins to reorient off of the existing street and to the east of the campus, where you see in orange the new multi-purpose building, in light green the new administration building, and creating a new central quad kind of amphitheater outdoor dining space between the multi-purpose and the existing permanent classrooms. We also introduce a new classroom building to replace the portables, and you can see the parking lot that forms at the southwest corner, getting separating again public parking and drop-off from staff parking. Our recommended first phase here, again, is the multi-purpose in its ultimate configuration, and some relocation of the playground area. We weren't able, within that $10 million, to begin to attack the parking lot problem because we have buildings in the way at the west. But during our exercise, our prioritization exercise with you, all of those things are up on these boards, and that may turn to be a higher priority for you at the board level. Tuolumne. Again, about half of our classrooms are in portable buildings. We have ultimately reconfiguration of the front door and the parking. This is a theme of our presentation today, is get what was traditional front doors have turned into very busy streets in a lot of cases, and trying to get those parking and drop-off areas off of those main streets. In this case, a new parking lot to the north begins to create the new front door with the multi-purpose in orange, the administration in green, and new classroom buildings and kindergarten complex supporting the existing permanent classroom wings. Again, with so much of the campus in portable buildings now, there is a significant price tag in this replacement campus. We were able to propose a $8 million first phase, that is the multi-purpose building with just a small relocation of a few portable classrooms and a reorientation and improvement of the drop-off location at the north. We have a second option for this one, however, and that was a replacement campus at district staff request. We wanted to bring forward this concept because as the price tag for full implementation of these buildings began to get to 50 or 60 million dollars, there may be opportunities at some of the sites to look at that. I'll call it the big bang of a replacement campus. This is kind of a trend we're seeing in California as you start to get to these 60-year-old school buildings and start asking yourself how much longer will these survive? And so what we've shown here is an idea, a big idea, and that is you build a new campus on the playfields, and you do this all at once while the existing campus remains untouched and operational. And then in the next phase, after students have moved into this new campus, you complete the play fields on the existing campus, new hardcore drop-off and parking. Obviously, this is a very simple schematic, but where the site allows it, you can see that where some of our multi-phased implementation touched that $60 million price tag, an all-new project, because it's in today's dollars and it doesn't have all the complexities of phasing, is possible in a similar price tag. So in the prioritization exercise, we have shown at Tuolumne a second option for that kind of plan.
I'm going to interject here
Please.
just for a minute and let Laura take a breath and provide a little context for this particular option, or just the basis around this. Not only, as Laura mentioned, this is an ideal site. We have the space, we have the field area to do this. She mentioned earlier the price tag. The total price tag for each one of these is approaching $60 million or over $60 million. And we haven't built a new elementary school in this district in a long time. And to build a new elementary school, you're going above what it costs to build a new elementary school. We're not recommending this option, but we just wanted to throw it out there for consideration and provide a little a context to this. And I wish I had a map up here, but as many of you know, Tuolumne borders is right on the border of Ceres Unified School District. If you just go down the street and take a left, you're in a Ceres elementary school. There's two elementary schools within close proximity to Tuolumne Elementary School. You constantly hear from us. We are declining enrollment at the elementary schools. We're losing students. In particular, we're able to catch the families that ask for an inter-district transfer out of the Tuolumne school boundary to Ceres. And this year, that was 135 students out of Tuolumne to Ceres Unified. It's just it's kind of an out-of-the-box option thinking that potentially could get a new school. But as we'll talk about, and as many of you know, we've talked about, the resources aren't there to do everything. So just wanted to provide a little context to the basis for this option. It's kind of out of the box. We do lose a large number of Tuolumne families to Ceres. It's the biggest, when you look at our schools, it's the biggest that we lose from to Ceres Unified School District, and it's just a way of thinking, just something to think about. So we'll take a moment, and while Laura's here, to ask any questions about the process and any other questions the board has at this point.
I think this is on this Tuolumne option of building a new school. Would building a new school open us up to being in a better position to get state bond dollars?
We will. We'll talk about that in particular, but if you want to address that now, I need you. You can go to the microphone. We'll let our facility consultant talk about that.
Yeah, so this new campus could put us in a position for state funding. There are multiple programs that we'd be able to access. And depending on the school site or the overall district's eligibility for those state funds, there are calculations that go into that I'll get into a little bit later. But that would open the district up for that for matching funds.
So essentially, we could be looking at, by building a new school for, I guess the numbers are 60, versus rehabbing the existing school for 66 million, we could be looking at state dollars that might subtract from that $60 million amount, correct?
So you'd be able to apply for state funding for either option, for a modernization of the existing site or for the new site.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which one would get a priority in the bond type analysis?
That's a good question. So Prop 13 is up for voters in March, and if that passes, we'll have to wait for the regulations to be written and to be solidified before we could really get into the details on that. But it looks like right now that modernization projects are prioritized, but that's not finalized yet.
And a new school wouldn't qualify as modernization, it would just be new school. But it's a new school at an existing site, so I'm just kind of wondering.
Yes, so
There's there.
that would be something that we would look at doing, and whatever benefits the district more is how we would go after that funding. It would be a strategy at that point, yeah.
Trustee Brown.
So piggyback question, we would we would still have to come up with 30 million because we would only be eligible for matching funds from the state, or are there funds beyond match if we built a new school?
So what you have to come up with as a district, it'll depend on what your eligibility is and which program we're accessing funds from. So we wouldn't know that until we're at that stage, but there's different percentages of match, and that depends on which program.
And what's the highest percentage of match?
At the moment, it's 60%.
So 60% state money, 40% district money?
Yes, but not based on project cost. It's based on the eligibility that's available at the site. So I have an example when my slides come up, and I can speak to that a little bit more, but it won't be 60% of the district's 100% project cost. Yeah.
Well, I guess the first question goes to Tim, and just how long is that projected out to from now till we would have a brand new facility at Ptolemy? And then the second question is, why am I blanking on it? When do we have to take a definite route? Are we talking about, like, can we submit paperwork for both options and then see which one's gonna pan out, or do we need to make a decision yeah, exactly, throw all our eggs in one basket and then hope for the best?
So what we're doing right now, and what Sony is and her firm is working on for us, is updating our eligibility at not only these sites but other sites throughout the district. So at some point when the time comes, we can get in line either for modernization funding or new construction. And so as Sony points out, and you'll hear later, each site, depending on the site, has a different eligibility factor based on how what currently is in the inventory at the site. So no decision needs to be made right now at this point. If Proposition 13 does not pass in March of 2020, we probably will be coming back to the board for a different phasing plan at that point. So I mean, right now we're considering, we're assuming some bond proceeds, state bond proceeds to get us through our projects. But if that does not happen, we're going to have to come back probably with a different implementation plan at that point. So as far as the time, I'll let Laura probably talk about the time.
So in order to access state funds, you do need your plans approved by the Division of the State Architect. And that typically is 6 to 8 months in their hands, and I'll say 6 to 8 months in the design professional's hands. So you're typically about a year and a half from when you make a decision to when you can put your hat in the ring for those bond funds. So to answer your question about the fork in the road, you probably want, because of the cost involved in the design piece and the fees to the state architect, you probably want to make a decision about which direction you want to go before you set the design professionals moving forward.
Okay. I wanted to ask another one. So are we working on a prototype of how that would look like at the moment, or that's kind of to the point you were making, that we first need to see the other part?
Yeah, that's kind of to the point of this is, I mean, have you seen phase one recommendations that we've come up with the help of our design team and the input from our stakeholders, based on what we believe are our guiding principles as set forth by the bond measures and the board. But the board may have different, there may be something up here when we get to that point that's not in phase one that now we have to readjust and look at adding that to phase one. So that's the process will determine that.
I got a couple that I'm going to go to Trustee Marks on the phone because we're still on the. When we say modernization funds, what's left right now from the previous state bond is modernization, correct?
There's nothing left.
There's nothing left because last year there was the ability to get modernization funds, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yep, it ran out in February.
Okay,
of
so
this
there's
year.
0 on the table at this point.
Right now, there is 0.
That answers one question.
Yeah. Districts continue to get in line for Prop 13 or for a future bond, state bond, but right now there's 0 on the table.
So all this relies on the voters approving to tax ourselves again.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm gonna get off that subject. Portables, when we were talking about these $5 million portables on all these different sites, is this new construction or are these sort of where you can get these modular buildings placed? What is that value based on? Because they're 2 different price points, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
I will let Laura answer that. I believe it's based on stick-built.
It
classrooms.
is. We did all of our estimating based on stick-built construction because it's the most conservative approach. The district is doing a prefabricated building currently, and that might be an option once you see it and you look at that. I will say though, when we're estimating at this conceptual level and we're going into a multi-phase complicated project on existing sites, we know every shovel we put in the ground is going to hit something that's 60 years old and probably needs some replacement. So being conservative at this conceptual level, I think is wise, and carrying contingency for those unknowns is wise. And then as you bring your design professionals on to attack kind of phase one of each project, you can start to make those assumptions or those changes about how you want to tackle the budget problem.
In addition to that, we talked earlier about our first issuance and projects completed and projects still in the work to be completed. This summer, Wilson Cafeteria is one that currently is in Sacramento or is being prepared to submit to Sacramento at the Division of State Architects to move forward. The plan is a prefabricated building for Wilson Cafeteria. We will use that kind of as our standard once completed as far as cost goes to determine if there's a difference.
So we'll have a model to look at.
We will. We will. Beginning in the summer, next summer, summer of 2020, that project is set to begin, assuming we get our approval,
Yeah,
get
I
through the
guess.
approval process.
And I think the only other thing I would add, and it goes to uniqueness of Modesto City Schools, because if we're talking about Tuolumne, if I'm not mistaken, Tuolumne sits in county, not city. And so are there going to be additional hurdles there when we start talking about connections? It's a different animal because it's not in Modesto City proper. And so you're not necessarily connected to National City. You're still messing with the county, and that would be interesting to factor in. And I'll leave it at that because it's Grigori, right? Grigori sort of sits outside of Modesto, sort of sits county, but Tuolumne is very unique in that way as well, while they're still talking about tearing down the bridge. And then I'll go to Cindy.
Hi. Yes. Can you hear me okay? Yep. All right. Thank you. My question is, how are we able to fund these 8 schools? So like a big picture, how can we fund the 8 schools that we're planning to remodel? Because our funding this next year is only $14 million total for our bond issuance.
We do have a slide for that. I mean, we can start talking about that right now if the board is through with questions around the master plan. But we will talk about that, Cindy, coming up.
Okay.
As far as the bond issuance schedule.
Okay, I just was trying to understand how this was going to work since each school costs about $10 million and it's only 8 schools and we have about 26, I believe we want to do. So I was just checking to see about that. Thank you.
Anything from the gentleman? TTA? Just watching, taking notes. I believe it's back to you. If there's no other questions, to the next piece.
Oops, I'll get it. So yeah, the next piece obviously is talking about project funding. And we're going to talk about our existing bond program, Measures D and E, and the bond issuance schedule for that. But then we will pivot when we're done and talk about how we can potentially leverage state funds in the event of a successful bond measure to get that done. So we do have a bond issuance schedule, and I don't know, can you see that, Cindy? Are you watching? Are you able to follow along? Yes. Okay, so we do.
I can see it. Yes.
We do have a plan that the board has approved or seen, bond issuance schedule, and this is done so we spread the bonds out over time. And the reason we do that is obviously we can't do $130 million worth of work in one summer or 2 summers, but it also helps us maintain the tax rate that we've promised to our voters, that we said we were going to do. So if we maintain this schedule here that the board has seen and the board has approved, it does help us control our issuance costs and maintain that tax rate that we've promised the voters that we would maintain. Now, we recognize we can't do everything at once. As mentioned, we know we can't do that. So our improvements have to be phased in. So you've heard us talk about phasing, and they have to be phased in to meet this cash flow based on our bond issuance schedule. Originally, we're going to plan to issue every 3 years. That's still the plan because it's going to take us that period of time to work on phases, get the design done, and get the approvals approved, and that way we're not sitting on our dollars. We want to make sure that we're good stewards of the dollars, we're doing what we say we're going to do, and we're spending them on a schedule. So, and I think I heard you say 14 million, Cindy, but what you see is we have two measures. So you got to combine the two. So we basically have split these up in about 25, 26, 27 million dollars over every 3 years. So it's not just 14 million. Our next issuance right now is in the $25 million estimate range. We may have to increase that to 30 million, 35 million or so based on what we talk about as far as immediate projects implementation. But we know we can't do, based on this, we can't even do $80 million worth of projects in the next summer. We just don't have the dollars available, nor do we have the time to do that in the next 1 or 2 summers. So this is the schedule. As it says here, we're going to revise it annually based on our capital needs. That means, whatever our priorities are, we can revise it. And tax base, hopefully, will continue to grow, which means that will expand, not shrink. But ideally, if we can make it work, we're going to issue fewer series and issue them sooner. Again, our goal is to reduce our issuance costs, save the taxpayers money in the long run. So I don't know if that answers your question, Cindy, or not, but we have to prioritize our projects, and that's what tonight is about, is to set a priority and make sure that our priorities are consistent with the board's priorities or the board's intentions while we maintain what we said we're going to do with measures D and E.
Okay, so I have one other question. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Yes.
Okay, so my next question is are we only planning to do the 8 schools? And if so, why, unless we aren't, then when are we doing the other schools and how are we going to fund them?
So I'm not sure what you mean by planning to do the other schools, but I'll try to answer that question. In the first issuance, we have $1 set aside for master plans for every school, for all 26 schools. So we will, at the end of the third year, we will have all 26 schools with a completed master plan. If you recall, on March 18th, we did a dot game with the board to establish the first set of priorities, which were the 8 that we're talking about tonight. We are currently in the works of getting the next 9 going based on that board meeting. There will be 9 more that we turn over to Lionakis to complete, and then the final 9 will be done. So we will get all those completed within the first issuance. Now, also, I want to point out that the work that you saw up there, the quick strike projects, our goal is to do something at every site within the first 3 years. And so there is going to be something at each site, but these were the 8 that were identified as the highest priority, the most need. So when you talk about our guiding principles, they didn't have just one, they had 2, 3, or 4 in many cases of what those guiding principles were. And really it's centered around, as all of these, safety and security of not only our students, but our staff and our families. So that's why you see these 8. Money from the first issuance has already been allocated. It's $27 million was issued. To this date, we've spent about $13 million of that over the summer. So we have $14 million. We've got about half of that left to be spent over the next 2 years or next 2 summers. The 2 big things that are coming up with that beginning this summer is the Bret Hart rebuild at Bret Hart, and then previously mentioned Wilson Cafeteria. So those are, and then we have more marquees to do, we have more paint jobs to do, and then the master plans will be completed at every school site. So right now that's the plan, unless we receive different direction from the board. We recognize that unfortunately it's not fair, it's not equitable. We've got a lot of, as you can see here, we have a lot of dollars that are going to need to be spent at our schools to bring them up to standards, today's standards, and at these 8, to do that campus-wide, it's $60 million range for each one of those at this point conceptual estimates. So we recognize that it's not equitable, or it's not equal. We have limited resources, and so what you see here, we're going to put together a plan to do these 8 priority sites, and then we will work to get to the remaining schools with the remaining funds. Hopefully we get some state bond funds that will augment that and extend that out. Did that answer your question, Cindy?
Yes, that was great. Thank you.
Okay.
I think I'll just grab it. Chad, Trustee.
So tell me if I'm stepping too far ahead or in a different direction. But as I look at the 131 million that we have from D&E, and you divide that by the 26 schools, that's roughly 5 million per site. And if I'm looking at the phase one, excuse me, phase one proposals for these 8 schools at approximately 10 million per site, we would need matching funds from the state to be able to say that we can go forward with a phase one project at each of these schools and still have money for the rest of the schools.
Yeah, I mean, just rough math, you're right. We've got about another $100 million, 104, I think it is right now, under our authorization to do. And you see potentially $80 million worth of high priority projects here in front of you. So that leaves, without anything else, I mean, just simple math, that leaves $20 million then to address the other 18 sites that are being master planned. It does include, science labs at the junior highs. That was promised. Now, the interesting thing about the science labs, I mean, we already have facilities. We've got buildings. We're not going to have to put a new building in. It's going to be modernizing an existing building. But you're absolutely right. I mean, without any state funding, we've got 14 million left of our first issuance, and then we've got another 104 million that we plan to issue over 3 or 4 more series.
Yeah.
So
Next question then is, with the Tuolumne, the possibility of looking at a new school on the campus, I can't see how we could possibly do that and do the work that we need to at the other schools. It seems like it's disproportional allocation of the bond money on one site. So I'm going to need to have some convincing to tell me that it's even feasible to look at that as an option.
Well, it's not. I mean, financially, from a needs standpoint across the district, it's not feasible. But it was something that, because of the issues that I spoke about earlier, it could be a consideration. Because if you probably hear, elementary school being built in the $40 to $50 million range, brand new elementary schools, and we would spend $60 million to modernize old buildings, old facilities. We'd not even get a new school out of it, and it's only part of the campuses at some of those. So that was the reason for that, and it is up here. I mean, you will have in a minute. We will have an assignment for the board to place your dots on priority projects that you'd like to see. We want to make sure that our priorities that we came up with the design team and the input from the stakeholders matches what the board's priority is. If we did that simply, if we took $60 million and put it to Tuolumne, you're absolutely right. There's not enough to do these other projects at this point in time.
Trustee Lopez.
You mentioned something about rebuilding Bret Harte. Can you explain that a little bit more? What you mean by that?
Yeah. What was it? December of 17. We had the fire at Bret Harte that destroyed a wing, 6 classrooms. It was a library, a computer lab, and then classrooms. And so we are moving forward. Plans are at Sacramento in DSA for approval to rebuild that footprint that we lost. And so we're going to have insurance proceeds to do that, but we're going to need some assistance from Measures D&E to rebuild those classrooms to get what the site needs and requires for their instructional needs.
How much do you think that's going to be about the difference?
Let me see if I can find that real quick here for you. We are estimating, and I can turn to probably Dwayne and Roger. We're estimating $3 million for that project, and I'm not sure if that is net insurance proceeds or not. That's just bond proceeds. If that answers your question.
3 million?
3.2 million.
So to pick up off of that, then, and it's certainly up to all of us to figure that out, but given all the years we've been funding construction out of the general fund, maybe we don't use 3.2 million in bond money to flush out Bret Hart. We use general fund and then hold that back for bond projects. I don't know if it's half dozen in one hand, six in the other, but I think Trustee Brown already hit my biggest concern is that when you're done with everything that's behind me, you've got about 25 million left for the other sites. And I think we've promised a lot of things and the science labs and so forth that maybe there's a way to front load some of that and get those science labs in the junior highs earlier while we're doing some of this. I don't know. All this is so far out, but yet behind me we're committing to close to $80+ million, not counting inflation over years. It's
Well,
a
it does
concern.
count inflation. I just want to, or it counts escalation. So I just want to.
That's what escalation means?
Yes.
I just want to clarify, because maybe I'm misunderstanding this. What you just said, John, is that we have 80 million up here. Well, what I'm seeing up here is a total site plan, which is like 60 million, right? For each one, right?
Yeah, I was just
So
talking about the
that's-
phase one.
Okay, just
Just
okay.
the phase one. The other stuff is
Okay,
crazy.
I just want to
And
make
about
sure.
480 million.
No, that's where the
Okay.
$1 billion book turns
so
into a
what
multi-billion
we're
dollar
seeing
book.
up here is well beyond what we've got the bond for, but phase one is a portion of this only.
Yes.
And so I guess my question is, your question for us is, what part of phase one do you want to do, or what part of what is your question to us?
Well, we're going to be asking you to, there's projects up here that, if you go back to the slide for phase one, are not, there's more up here than what was on phase one.
Yeah. This is the whole.
What we
plan.
want to
Pretty
do
much.
is see if maybe we need to move something that we thought was a phase 3 or 4 project
Okay.
up into phase one, based on board input. We just want to make sure that our guiding principles, our recommendation matches what the board's desire is.
So conceivably, when we're looking at phase one, we may never get to phase 2 and 3 on these sites.
You're absolutely right.
Okay, that's the elephant in the room. Okay. I just want to make sure. It's been a long day. So, these plans that we have here are, best case scenario for each of the school sites and getting state funds. That would be the only way we could do that.
If we were to get into other phases, yes, we would need to access state bond money to get into other phases and also do more work at other sites.
And if we just do phase one of these 8 schools, we're going to burn through how much of the total bond money? More than half?
Yeah, we have about $130 million of authorization, and we have 104 left. So we already issued and authorized 27 million for our quick strike projects, to plan for these. So it's even more than that. If you were to look at the remaining bond issuance, it's 80 million out of 104 million is what we would be utilizing to do these high priority, these sites that were identified as high priority sites, to do the safety and secure areas and multi-purpose rooms.
Okay, do the exact math here, because you're basically saying you had 104 left over before you started on phase one of these 8, right?
Right.
Okay, so doing the math, and we have 26 schools that the bond needs to touch. That's what the public expectation is. So 104, and then what is the total 8 phase one cost? I need a whiteboard.
It was
Okay,
about
80?
we're
Okay.
figuring about $80 million
Okay,
for
so you have
10 million per
about
site.
20 some odd to do the remaining schools. Oh, okay. So we can't even do phase one on all these, really, if we're going to look at any equity across the district. Is that the other issue you guys have come to?
That is, obviously that is an issue, but again, our goal here was to do the 8
Yeah.
initial high priority sites that staff had identified as high need, high priorities, as well as the board through the process of the priority utilization for the master plans.
Yeah.
We've known all along that, I mean, you've seen the facility needs analysis. You know, we've known all along that $130 million doesn't really get many bites into that apple for that. And so we've known that this is a long-term plan for the district that potentially could require other bond authorizations or other bond programs. We're limited with our current bond program, even though we did, that's why we did 2 measures. I mean, if we hadn't done 2 measures, we'd be talking about 75 million or 70 million. And then how far does that go over 26 schools? So we do recognize, as I said, it's not equal, but the needs aren't equal either. I mean,
No,
these
that's
are
true.
these are our high need schools, our high leverage schools, and so that's the reason for this. Now, I mean, we're
And don't take my comments as anything up there isn't valuable and worth doing. These schools need our attention. Absolutely. It's just, how do we do this is more my question. So.
And going back to Trustee Brown's comment, he's absolutely right. If you just do simple math, 26 schools, you're looking at $5 million per school. And what do you get at each school for $5 million? Is that, and I hate to say it, but I mean, is that getting, we don't even get a multipurpose room, as you saw, for that at many of those schools. So again, these schools were identified because it's not just a multipurpose room, it's safety, security, it's drop-off pickup. I mean, it's things that are creating problems at each one of these school sites that we need to address.
You know, something else to consider, and Mr. Zerly has spoke about this earlier. Right now, we're talking about dollars without any sort of matching dollars. So we are making the assumption that there's not going to be any other eligible money out there. Now, I think this is going to be a process. By no means the dots that you put on here today is then going to etch that in stone, and therefore we're doing this moving forward. We need to come back after March when we look to see what other dollars we have access. By that time, we should have additional facility master plans, and we'll have more data and more information to be able to say, okay, so then what is in the running for the next 2 years? Because really 2 years is what we need to be able to get any sort of buildings out of that. So while yes, this is the first blush with looking at our facility master plans, because this was the first 8 which were identified by you all, but we will come back again once we have the next 8 and more information and more data. If I'm not mistaken, and actually Mr. Zerly has a couple pages to go over, there's multiple bond measures that are going to be coming forward, and I think with given the outcome of these measures, we could be having a different conversation.
Trustee Irvin?
So basically, we're talking about a question with the dollars, and going back to what Trustee Newman, Brown, Mr. Zerly, it's equity. You know, how do we get? Because if we take that $5 million for all the schools, and some schools, you know, it's not going to be equitable for the high need schools because they get $5 million, where other schools will get $5 million, and it will be improvements for them. But, you know, so how do we get to a point where we say it's going to be equitable, even though there's going to be funding spent more on other schools, such as high need schools, than other schools? So I think it's just a question of equity. How do we come to an equitable solution so we can see how we can make improvements across the board and have it be equitable, not based on dollar, but based on needs? Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir?
I would ask, kind of throwing another.
We ran out of microphones.
Okay, so I wanted to throw another factor in the kind of the calculus, and not only are we talking about what's equal, $5 million per school is equal. That's not equitable because obviously these 8 sites need more, and I think that's the right approach. Second part, it's easy just to look at all this and be overwhelmed. I mean, the board has a very difficult job. I think it's important to not get overwhelmed and just say, look, we've already prioritized these 8. Let's focus on that and move forward. The other factor I definitely want to think about, though, is the K-6 schools, elementary schools, are where we're bleeding the most students. We need to start thinking, too, which one of these 8 schools can we rebuild more quickly to attract the students back to those sites so that we're getting the funding back. And that's what I want to know, how much of that has been in the thought process in terms of the prioritizing. Where can we rebuild Tuolumne? Because we know we're losing students to series. And is that more of a priority than, El Vista?
Well, I mean, I think I definitely share your point because I know that we have 3, right? We have Fairview, we got Shackelford, and we got Tuolumne, which all are the biggest, the closest ones to the border where we are declining in enrollment through, which happened to be in my district. So I definitely think that we have to talk about equity. I'll talk about equity because we have to improve these schools that not only for the fact that we're in declining enrollment, but these are the most needs. These are areas that some of the oldest schools. So all those 3 factors is why we need to invest more on these, on all 8. But especially talking about what you were mentioning about where we're declining enrollment as well.
Trustee Brown.
Are we on? Okay.
We're on.
So just to piggyback on what you were saying, Yasser, it is easy to feel overwhelmed. But I think as we try to keep perspective, we've got to be darn grateful that we've got that $131 million to work with. And let's find positive ways to make that money get leveraged and work hard for us and give back to the community everything that they deserve.
Trustee Newman.
But as I look at these, I think we've identified the right 8 schools. But as I look at the phase 1, I go back to what we sold the public, and health and safety, classroom science, and whatnot. So we sold them an idea that we were going to improve education at these sites, and so I think that phase 1 needs to reflect that. And so, the multi-purpose building, I think we need to know how does that impact education. I think we need to be ready for how does that improve and impact education as opposed to building more classrooms or improving the classrooms. And I think that we have to go back to why we passed the bond, not just to, improve our facilities because they're so old and they desperately need it. It's about what was sold as a priority to the public. So, while the parking lots are great, the safety component is a priority. So the safe drop off and pickup, a safe place to park is not part of that. So that if we have to prioritize things, so that's how I'm thinking about it in terms of how does this impact our students' education, because I think that the idea behind the bond was improving education. So I think ultimately where my priority would be on what parts of the phase improve education.
Trustee Lopez, I believe is. Oh, Trustee Irvin, you have one?
Amy had.
She took it. That's that teamwork thing. Teamwork works. Y'all pick up all my stuff wherever I get a chance. Trustee Lopez.
No, I was just gonna, as a point and argument in favor of the multi-purpose room, I'd like to point out that Shackelford's in the room, and Shackelford has one of the smallest cafeterias. Where, how long does your the time from where kindergarten or pre-K goes into your sixth grader, how long is that gap?
Well, we start at 10:45 and we end at 1:15.
So it's, yeah,
So, and if I may add, and not only that, Shackelford is the honor of having the oldest cafeteria in the district as well. And then next to Shackelford is John Muir. So it is, I would defer to the instructional experts as to how that impacts the day.
Yeah.
But Shackelford, I mean, they spend an inordinate amount of time getting students into and out of that cafeteria, and they can't even stay in there to eat because there's not enough room for them. So that was, I mean, and that was overwhelming response in our voter survey. It was an overwhelming response in this process with the stakeholders. Safe drop-off and pickup areas were overwhelming responses as well, centered around. Now safety is a large net that captures a lot of things. But if you think about Tuolumne, Shackelford, Fremont, Muir, Fairview, those are all bad areas for parents to come pick up and drop off their students. John Muir, the reason John Muir is up here as far as parking goes, the reason that was in phase one, we had an incident last year on Coffee where a car was speeding down Coffee, flew through the fence, and right there where students were playing, which would now be a parking lot. So, I mean, I don't want to discount anything. I don't think it's not what we promised the voters, but it is priorities that were identified.
Okay, Trustee Irvin?
Yeah, just to piggyback on that with the Shackelford, back when I was in charge of after-school programs, that used to be the after-school program in that little old cafeteria, multi-purpose room and everything else it used to be. So, you know, and how it impacts instruction, I mean, it does, you know, and just from my experience over there from those years ago, it was like, man, how do we do it? But it's time now. We got resources now, so it's time to help Shackelford come into the new age of education.
No, I think we all agree on that, and I think that's what's interesting about tonight is you come into this with concerns, and all of us have picked up on the same things. How do we get this and spread this out and get to the right places? I think Franklin's another interesting story on the cafeteria. I've walked at school. They have a lot of students. It's a very small room, and it's in and out as well. And then you talk about driving down the road, because I come in 132 from work. That takes me right by Franklin. And you see all the kids walking on the sidewalks, in the streets. You got trucks flying by. Lots to do. If we're good for a moment, let's turn it back over and do the financing as far as the state match part of the presentation, and then come back and circle around for more questions and figure out where we go next.
Yeah, absolutely. I will turn it back over to Sony. You can use that one.
Okay, as we know, the state match is very important to many, many districts, including this one. And so funding is based on a per pupil grant amount for eligible facilities. And this is talking about modernization funding specifically. In this presentation, there isn't, all of this speaks to modernization and not new construction or any other of the funding programs that are available. And so state funding right now, as I said earlier, right, there's no more current Prop 51 funds available unless some come back into the program. But even then, there are already projects in line for that funding. So it's really important just that Prop 13 passes in March. Let's see. At that last point, funds right now, I'm working with other districts who have submitted projects in 2015, 2016, who are just now getting funding, getting their matching funds for those projects because the backlog was so great at the state, and we were out of bond funds for so long. The state's doing an a better job at processing those applications and getting those out quicker than they were a couple years ago, but that's what we're looking at for timing. So the school facility program is the current program that's in place. Prop 13 would replace the program, but not change very much about it. So just a little history on the bond. So at the moment, there's about $52 billion that have been funded since 1998. And only one bond hasn't passed. That was in the early 90s. So we have about 20 plus years of state bonds being passed. The state has a pretty good track record, and the voters have a good track record of approving these. Most recently was Prop 51, which was $9 billion for K-12 schools. And it was $3 billion for modernization, and that funding lasted about 3.5, I would say, to 4 years. That funding was, and then it was spoken for, and about $1 billion of that was spoken for prior to Prop 51 passing. So there was only about $2 billion left for other districts to get in line after it passed. So that's why it's really important that we continue to do applications for state funding now, because if Prop 13 passes, we want to be there at the front of the line and not at the back of the line. So Prop 13 will be a $15 billion facility bond, but only only $9 billion of that is going to K-12 schools. The remaining $6 billion is going to community colleges and above. And $5.2 billion of that $9 billion is going to be for modernization funds. So Prop 13 will fund new construction. We've talked a little bit about that, modernization, charter, and career tech. It was signed by the governor just a month or so ago, and the governor's office was very instrumental in drafting the legislation, so they were very helpful as opposed to Prop 51. The governor did not support that bond at all, so the current administration is much more helpful and much more in favor of a state school bond. Let's see. Yeah, so as I said, there are only minor adjustments to the current program, but we don't have a full listing of what that change will be. But there will be a new priority processing system for Prop 51, or for the current school facility program. It was a first in, first out program, but now there's going to be a little bit of priority. So health and safety projects will be prioritized. Schools that are financial hardship, if there's any abatement for lead drinking water, those projects will be prioritized. Any severe overcrowding will be prioritized, and then any students, unduplicated percentages. So, and at low bonding capacity. So modernization funding is funding for existing buildings only, and it's intended to extend or improve the useful life of existing facilities. And there are a few examples on the slide of the types of modernization work, but that's not an all-inclusive list. These are just examples. So it can be to upgrade existing things, or it can be used for replacement of like-kind area, where that's where we kind of get into that Tuolumne. If we were to use modernization funds, let's say we demolished 60,000 square feet, and then we built back 60,000 square feet, we could potentially call that a modernization project and not a new school, because we're going to demolish the old 60,000 and replace it with a new 60,000. So that's just an example of what modernization funds can do. And eligibility for this state match funding is based on a calculation of the ages of facilities, the number of classrooms, and site enrollment. And it's important to note that the facilities that this calculation is based on may be facilities that are no longer on the site. There was a baseline established for each site a long time ago in the late 90s, early thousands, that identified the existing classrooms on site. And so we have to use those classrooms to inform the inform the eligibility for the current time. And then site enrollment, I know we've talked a lot about declining enrollment at some of the elementary schools. And so it is really important that site enrollment increases, because that does increase your state match. And what this,
Where's this thing on? Can you back up just a second? Because you went quick there about
Sorry.
this eligibility thing, and sort of slow that down for me
Okay.
one more time.
yep. Yeah, so the calculation is based upon the age of facilities that are on site. It's based on the number of classrooms that are on site and or square footage. There are different calculations, and we use the most beneficial. And then it's based on site enrollment. So all of those things are looked at together, and then based on the percentage of facilities that are eligible, either using classroom count or square footage, then we use enrollment, and then there's a calculation done, and then that's what the site potentially has for.
You mentioned something about the 90s in there, though.
Yes, so
Lost me.
so let's say I'm not familiar with these sites yet. We haven't started on them, but let's say Franklin was built, or the baseline, which is what it's called. The baseline was established in 1998, and there were 20 classrooms, and 15 of those are permanent and 5 are portable. Let's say in the meantime you've built 2 more portable classrooms, so now you're at 22. We would only be looking at those original 20 classrooms. Those two new portables that weren't on that baseline map in the beginning when it was first.
Okay, I'm
looked
caught
at.
up.
Okay.
It's just when you said 90s, I was trying to track up, and then you were doing the rest of the
Yeah.
calculation.
So sorry.
I
It's from the start of the school facility program.
Go forward.
Yeah.
I'm caught up. I just,
Okay, good. Okay, no problem. And so the funding is triggered once permanent buildings become 25 years old, and once portable buildings become 20. And then we can start accessing funding at the site. But unless there are facilities that are that old on site, we can't access any funding yet. And then the current match is a 60-40. It's a 60% state match, 40% district match. And I'll get into that calculation on the next slide. So we're only required to update for eligibility increases. This one's important for districts who have declining enrollment. So we don't have to report that the enrollment is declining, but it doesn't help. So we don't have to take a hit for that declining enrollment, but your eligibility isn't increasing at all because of that decline. Does that make sense? Kind of.
yeah,
Okay.
I think it's interesting that it's in there, because the entire state's more or less declining enrollment.
It is.
I'd be interested in seeing if they change the rules when they pass, if it passes, because it's not an issue that's unique to us,
No, definitely not.
and it affects some very, very big cities: San Diego, LA,
Yeah.
Oakland. I mean, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. But carry on.
Yep, and there is some talk in for Prop 13 that they want to reestablish these baselines where they want to relook at the sites as they are today. So instead of using those old maps, they want to update to what they look like now, and then they may have us update enrollment for today, which would hurt a lot of districts. So that's something that's being talked about, but nothing's finalized. But just
At least they're chewing on it.
yes. And then, so this last point here, so we can go and look back at projects or, projects that were done all the way back until August 27th of 98. So we can access matching funds for reimbursement projects. It doesn't have to just be these 8 sites here that we're looking at for future projects. We can go back and we can go look at painting projects or HVAC work or fencing or parking at other sites, and we can get reimbursement for that, and that could potentially be used toward this existing bond program.
So we can go all the way back.
Yes, you have to have complied with the state rules in place at the time. If you go back that far, it gets a little tricky to find that documentation, but for the most part, yes.
But then the assumption would be that everything we've spent the last summer on the quick strikes theoretically could be queued up right away, right?
It would be queued up in the timeline of
If it,
the state
assuming it
processing.
passes, I'm just thinking about what we've already spent. given
Yeah.
that there's a list
Right.
and people are out passing bonds left and right.
And not only that, but you can go back, I mean, you can look at the work we did at Burbank, you can look at the work we've
Yeah.
done even prior to that. So there are others that,
We are looking
Tony
at
is
some.
working on.
Yeah, I'm working
Okay.
on some right
I
now.
just know that once they
Yeah.
said this is out, if you're following the news, I just read that Clovis is going to float a $400 million bond,
Yeah.
which means they'll get right back in line also. And
Mm-hmm.
the sooner we can get in line,
Yep.
if we've got stuff, let's queue it.
Yep. That's what. Yeah. Tim and Dwayne and I are all working on that. So here's a sample. This is a very basic sample for the eligibility calculation for state match. So in this K6 category, let's say we have 100 grants, which is based on our facilities and based on our student enrollment. And then in our non-severe special day class, let's say we have 18 grants. Then our estimated, so each of those grade groupings is has its own per pupil dollar amount. And so 100 grants in the K6 category is worth $464,400 in state funds. So if we, and then 18 non-severe special day class pupils are worth $178,254 for a total of just over $640,000. So if we had a $2 million project, we could submit an application using the grants that we have available, this 118 grants, and we would get back 60% of that project, which in the state's eyes, the project is the eligibility that you have available. So we'd get $640,000 back on that $2 million project. So the matching funds is relative to your state eligibility and not relative to the state, to your, to the district's total project cost.
When you say grant, what does that grant mean in English?
So it's a per pupil dollar amount per, so a grant on there's 100 grants is 100 students, let's say. It's basically your pupil count. It's not
Okay, so
really-
grant is student in English.
It's a dollar amount.
Layman's terms.
Yeah. So this is just, a very basic example of what we're talking about when we're talking about state matching. And so, SDC stands for Special Day Class. And so the funding process, so how do we get in line for funding and how do we access these funds? So the eligibility at a site, the eligibility is that grants, the total grant amount that you have. So the eligibility has to be established and or updated. Like I said, that there has to be a building on site that's either 25 or 20 years old in order for there to be any funding available, in order to access any funding. And then, as Laura mentioned earlier, the plans need to be approved by DSA, by the Division of the State Architect. They have to take a look at them first. And then also the California Department of Ed, and they take a look at the plans and review for safety things. So all of these parking upgrades, all of the parent drop-off and pickup zones, those are all hot ticket items at CDE right now, where they're really paying attention to that and focusing on safety and drop-off zones. Yeah. It's a really hot item. And then once a plan set or a project, we can bundle multiple plan sets into one application. Then we prepare and submit the funding application to the Office of Public School Construction, or OPSC. And then we're in line for our funding. And then we take our ticket in line, and then we're gonna wait for them to process. And when funding is available, the project is reviewed by OPSC, and then we assist the district in any questions that OPSC has with the applications. And then once the projects have been processed and reviewed by OPSC, then they go to the State Allocation Board, and then the State Allocation Board approves the project and then puts them on another list for funding. And then we wait there for a little while, and then we can access that funding. So once it's approved, then the district must enter or typically these are reimbursement projects, so the district has already completed the project. These are, a lot of them are not current ongoing projects, but if it wasn't a reimbursement, then the district has to enter into a construction contract within a certain time frame when the funds are released. And right now, speaking to timing of funding, the governor's proposed to fund $1.5 billion annually in state bond funds. And so he's been sticking to that. So this will be the second fiscal year that the 1.5 is in place. And right now there's currently a $6 billion backlog that these projects are up against. And I didn't look at the number before I left the office, but I want to say there's about 400-ish million that is in line for Prop 13 already. The majority of it is for Prop 51 that's already spoken for, but there is a chunk that's already in line for Prop 13 funding. And so, as I mentioned earlier, I'm working on some projects right now for other clients that are, excuse me, that were submitted in 2015, 2016 that are just now being processed and being funded. So there's a couple years of waiting, but the only guarantee is that if you don't get in line, you won't get funding. And so the districts now who are receiving funding are the districts who continued to submit applications during a time where there was no available bond funds, and now they're the first in line for this new bond that's available.
Okay.
I think that's it for me.
So now we have a little exercise for the board. We're going to let you get up out of your seats for a few minutes and stretch your legs. And if you recall, probably 18 months or so ago, I think we kicked off this process. And you were tasked with spending monopoly money. And so the monopoly money kind of drove what we were going to put into the project list for the bond program. And so that's what kind of dictated the project level, the board's intent for projects in order to go to the community and ask for their support. Now we already have, as you know, and we've talked about, we have the bond measures. And so now we're looking to implement the bond program. And so you've had you've seen our recommendations. You've seen, and I ask you to just kind of set that aside for a minute, and just we want your input. I'm going to give you some dots, and I know there's a lot of dots here, but I want you to put 2 on each. So there's 8 boards. I want you to use 16 of these. Put 2 on each site. You'll see the projects listed on the right. And again, I want you to kind of just set aside what you've seen as far as our recommendations, because we want to see how it aligns with yours, with your thoughts and your interests. So I'm going to hand these out to you. Yes, sorry.
Okay, so if there's something on there, so if on a site it doesn't have what we want, can I put a sticky that this would be what I would want, or like calm down, that's not on the table at this point.
So you'd like a felt tip pin to write stuff?
No, like I could put a little yellow sticky.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. If we see something off, off in the corner somewhere that's not assigned to something, then we'll reach out to you, or we'll give you the opportunity to say, well, what is that project?
Okay.
If that's your desire. Okay. So 2. We ask that you put 2 on each. Use 16. 2 on each one of the 8 boards you see up there.
By the bullet point? Anywhere.
By the projects. You'll see the bullet points are projects that came out of the master plan process.
And I will have Charlene and Cindy at a later date put theirs on here as well.
So then we're down to, who am I going to?
You're going back to earlier.
All right, we ready to bring it back into sort of the family circle here? A little cheer kumbaya thing. And then back to Mr. Zierli, I hear, is the next move.
Thank you. We will talk about next steps and finish up. And as you can see, a lot of work needs to be completed at all of our sites, but specifically at these 8 sites, as we mentioned earlier, just to bring them up to standards for entry points, for drop-off pickup areas, for multi-purpose rooms. And so that's that's going to be a challenge. And I appreciate the comment about equity versus equality. I mean, these sites were identified because it wasn't equitable. They need more. They need more to their sites for various reasons. Could be age, could be condition, it could be a number of things. Could be location in a lot of these. And so I do appreciate that comment, and that's absolutely correct. I just want to be very clear that every site, 26 sites, will receive something from these bond measures, and many of them already have. It may be something that's just paint, or a marquee, or an all-call access system, or security cameras. But every site will receive something over the course of the bond program, and these though were identified, as you see, based on identified priorities. And thank you for the DOT exercise, because now we will look at and see how our priorities align with yours. And we may need to come back and adjust. There's no decisions being made tonight. This is a board workshop. This is for us to provide you and the community with information as to where we're currently at and where we're going. And you'll see that on the next steps. So what we're talking about, and as you heard Sony talk about earlier, is and I think she made a comment that the only thing you can count on is you won't receive funding if you don't get in line. I mean, that's the only sure thing, is if we don't do anything to get in line, we will not receive any state funding. So the next steps potentially would be to begin project design for these phase 1 projects at the 8 currently master plan sites. We are going to continue, as I mentioned, planning for other bond projects that we have in the works with the first issuance, and also site master plans at the remaining school sites. So there are 2 more rounds. There's a phase 2 and a phase 3 to get master plans done, and we will have all 26 master plans done with the first bond issuance. And then once the design phase is done, then we can submit applications to the state for modernization funding. We put modernization funding on there, but as you heard, it could be new construction. Depending on what we do, how we do it, whichever eligibility will get us the better grant match or grant funding, then that's what we will do, whether it's new construction or modernization. And then we will implement projects based on available funding. As I mentioned earlier, if Proposition 13, and I gotta tell you, in education, we drew the short straw with that number. And I read it was a coincidence. Who knows? But as mentioned, this governor supported AB 48. The governor and his administration supported it. So, we will counter that Proposition 13, but that is kind of a negative connotation in many circles. So, but that's our next step. That's our plan. We will bring you back an implementation plan based on what we received to date, based on the funding. Once we do an analysis of the funding, and then we will bring you back a plan for approval. Is there any other questions? Yes.
Trustee Brown.
So there's talk about additional state money on the ballot for November, and I know nothing's been formalized yet, but what do we know about the proposals that are coming forward?
Do you mean in terms of the different funding programs or what?
I've heard it said that there's more bond money potentially coming forward in November. Is that
It's for March.
Can I,
But
can I take a crack?
Sure.
Okay, because it goes to your point about Prop 13 and bad luck. It is my understanding, which is the other part of this, is the split roll, which again goes back and says they're going to pull off the Prop 13 protections from corporate businesses. And the way they're lobbying it is they're saying that that money will go to schools. So the pitch is tax the corporations, make the money run up, but it takes away the Prop 13 protections from business. And the selling point is that they're going to give it to schools. That's the one other thing I've heard out there that goes hand in hand with what Tim talked about with labeling it Prop 13, which is like a double witching hour thing because now Prop 13's out there being modified. And I think that's the other piece. I think the problem with that is that now you have folks saying that they're going to use that money to pay pension liabilities down, which again makes that highly inflammatory because now you're messing with Prop 13. You're talking about pensions that get people upset, and it's a mess. And I think that's one of the things that really does make me nervous about the Prop 13 is why they're going after split roll and they're pitching it to education and then all the other sort of things going on. They haven't been clear what they're going to do with that money yet. They just say it's going towards education. But the speculation I'm hearing is that the idea is to pay down pension liabilities at the state level. Who knows?
Just to answer your question, Trustee Brown, there are no other programs that would provide districts with state facility
Yeah,
money.
no, this would be general.
That we can use matching dollars for other than Proposition 13, which is March. So I hope that answers your question.
I think the only one question I have left, since we went through this, and I don't know how we would do it, but one of the things that we really brought up tonight is how many of these portables are sitting on streets. We have 8 behind us with at least 4 or 5, 6 of them with that issue. Can we look at where else that's an issue and somehow sort of put that in a priority loop no matter what? To at least look at what it would cost or take to get some of these portables off these fence lines, at least where cars are flying through. Only because you brought it up and it never occurred to me till you pointed out that they're pushing these things to the edge of the properties, which really does sort of make me nervous, not from the traditional school safety point, but the safety point of cars and fast moving. And, since I now know there's 6 out of 8 behind me, how many others are there?
We will bring that back to the
Just
board.
For personal
Sure.
knowledge. Trustee Lopez.
Yeah, I have a question in regards to Mears phase 1, and I see that in the overall one, there's the parking lot has an exit plan out to it has coffee for phase 1, but then it has for the overall plan has an exit out through the main or Lutheran. What are we expecting in terms of congestion here with Coffee Road, having that entrance only through the exit in and out? I mean, I guess MTA can attest to how of a hassle it is to get in and out on Coffee Road. And can we look at possibly adding that street that's going to come in the overall phase added to phase 1, just so that I don't know how that will do with congestion and traffic flow.
Well, I just Muir is not. If I don't think I'm wrong on this. I think it's largely a walked to school. I think there's a big walking population, so the drop off and it's less of a big issue, as I understand. A lot of the students are right. Yes. Yeah. That's the nature of the neighborhood. They're walking, so that's that safe drop off is less of an issue.
Oh, it looked to me like that was the staff parking. That's why I said I was concerned with.
And steer
Staff parking.
and steer clear of traffic circles I can go take pictures over at Enoch's for you if you want me to.
We will look at that, Trustee Lopez, but to do all of that would require moving the existing classrooms, the early childhood education, that is right there, I believe. So.
I was gonna say, I'm like, that's gonna be a hassle for the first couple of years of that.
Right. Right.
Okay. Trustee Irvin, I saw a hand move.
Yes, I just wanted, the question I have is about the safety. I know we talk about it, and that's one of the priorities, but what are some of the major implications when addressing the safety? I know we talk about a lot about parking and stuff, but in terms of environmental, safety, visual, access and things like that, what are some of the major things we're looking at in terms of safety,
You want to take? I'll start, and then I'll let our design team finish it up. But we're looking at access, secure entry points. Vista is one up here that does not have a secure entrance and doesn't have a secure exit. Young students can run out to Vista to the street. If they're not watched at all times. So. There's a lot that goes into that to answer that question, but from our point of view, from staff, we're looking at secure entrance, exits, controlled access points as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, we do a lot of the site planning around community policing through environmental design, which is passive strategies before you get to cameras and all the things that you are also implementing. So single point of entrance is the single best thing you can do on a school, is control that entrance and lock the perimeter. So that single point of entrance, pulling those admin spaces from the center of campus, in a lot of cases, your administration is buried in the middle, and putting them out at the perimeter. So every public person would have to go through that after the gates were closed. The fencing program is another piece, obviously the drop off for student safety. And then as we look at the site planning, getting sight lines so that single areas on campus can monitor a lot of different locations.
Does that include cameras?
We have
I
cameras,
think the
didn't we?
district is doing cameras.
We've done cameras.
Cameras are already part of the first phase. That's where going back, talking about every single campus is getting something.
Right.
Every single campus is getting security cameras in the first phase.
Okay. Good.
And then a hat tip to our students, because our students do more for safety than anything. They really do go tell. I can't think of a time when I've not heard that we got in front of something. Almost every case has been because a student went and told an adult what was going on, and the adults percolated it up, and the students are amazing about it. And it's just a tribute to sort of culture in the city, I guess. But almost every single case is a young person going and finding an adult because they heard something and they run, and hat tip to them.
I just want to reiterate something Trustee Brown said, and just make sure everybody's aware. We are so grateful to have $130 million to spend on our 26 school sites. However, you can see the challenge. Who would think out in the public that it would be easy to spend $130 million? But just at a third of our schools, we spend the majority of that. But I just can't say enough how much we appreciate the support we got, the high level of support we got from our communities, and we will make sure that we do what we said we were going to do. It won't be. These are major projects. We don't have enough dollars to potentially do major projects at every single school site. These are high need, high priority areas that we've identified. So you can see the challenge that we have.
Yeah, and the hope is we get it right, because we've got I think we talked about this when we were doing the bond. The trick was prove to the public that we can get this right and get a lot done, because we have to go back. And I think that's key. And we've talked about that at a bunch of different monies as far as trust. How do we manage this money? How far can we make it stretch, and how much good can we do with it? Because we've got to go back 10, 15 more times still at some point, if that makes sense.
Oh, potentially, and you mentioned, Clovis Unified's going out again for a $400 million bond measure. It seems like Clovis Unified
A steady go.
turns these out every 3 to 5 years because they have the trust
Yep.
that they've built within their community. I'm not suggesting we're at that point, but to do everything that we need to do would require
Gotta start somewhere.
multiple bond programs over the course of 10 to 20 years.
So I really appreciate the effort that's gone into these master plans. The dream of what we could eventually come up with on a school site, it's important, but one of the biggest pieces that I see to this is it keeps us from making short-term decisions that get in the way of future progress. So by having a master plan, we can make plans and we can do things now with whatever money we can allocate, but we won't be short-sighted into making decisions that will keep us from being able to grow the site or make improvements when we have the money to do it. So I think that this has been a very helpful process, and I appreciate all the effort so far going into this.
Thank you, and I just wanted to thank Laura and Sony, who came to us from Sacramento to participate in this. It was, as you see, it was a very detailed process for Lionakis to get these done. They did a great job, and we're confident they can do the next 9 in a similar manner. So I do want to thank them for coming and being part of this, as well as everybody that showed up here tonight as well.
All right, he took my closing line. Thank you, because it was thank you for coming down and going through all this. Is a lot. If there's no other questions or comments from board members, we're looking for a motion to adjourn. So moved. Seconded by Trustee Lopez. Adjourned. Everybody have a nice evening.